How can you still be feeling the chill? I asked, removing my jacket and offering it to her. She shivered. I'm anemic, and it must be around 4 degrees out here. You're crazy. I stretched my arms out and sighed as the cool autumn breeze swept through the park. I'm perfectly comfortable. She rolled her eyes, her ears twitching, a quirk of hers that I found endearing. Bundled up in the winter, she was almost cat-like, often lounging in the sunlight or huddled by the radiator, contentedly reading. In summer, she was the opposite, rarely wearing enough clothes, which prompted me to spend more time at the gym so I wouldn't look out of place when we went to the beach or pool, as she insisted we do often to cool down. Putting my arm around her, she leaned into me as we continued our stroll through the park. I like it here, she said. I looked around at the muted sounds and dimmed lights of the city park, overlooking the scattered litter. I do too, she chuckled and moved closer. What's so funny? I asked. Nothing. She looked down at the bowl in her hands, then back at me. New beauty treatment, she said, pulling out a piece of chicken and quickly popping it into her mouth. Women, in my experience, felt pressure to maintain a certain figure, and thus avoided heavily meat-based meals, especially when including multiple steaks. The carnivorous inclination wouldn't have been so problematic if not for her preference for spices, hot sauces, and cinnamon on her steak. Still, she was always happy to prepare it, and I lacked the heart to tell her otherwise. I just cut myself. I'm fine, she said. I entered the kitchen to find her cradling her hand, the knife on the cutting board beside a small spatter of green hot sauce, which was odd as I thought we had run out. You sure? I asked, taking a step forward to assist her. She nodded. I'm fine. Go sit down. I can get the first aid kit, I offered. I'm fine, she cut me off. Backing out of the kitchen, I dreaded what she might have done to the steak with that green hot sauce. Leaning back into the bed, I admired how the moonlight seemed to fall into her skin rather than radiate from it. I could still see her, and that was enough. Beside her, I noticed the small, horn-like spike on the back of her neck, oozing something green, which turned to mist before touching the bed, as always. I sighed and rolled over, wondering where she was from. The Fornax dwarf galaxy, Proxima Centauri, or perhaps the Triangulum galaxy. As I drifted off, I smiled, thinking that at this point, I was so enamored that I wouldn't even care if she ate me. She was working on her computer again, having recently installed a small antenna array in the attic, breaking the rental agreement. Looking at the device, I couldn't find any manufacturing labels or etchings, and the hookups didn't seem standard. Are you coming to bed soon? I asked. She glanced up, her skin oddly absorbing the light of the computer screen in the dark room. In a minute, I have to figure this out. Communicating with your people? I asked, partly in jest. Her ears twitched, and she let out a small, stuttering laugh. Something like that. I nodded. All right. But you do know you can trust me. You've got me quite wrapped around your finger. What? She asked, her expression faltering. The pheromones, whatever they did, I noticed the difference. It was becoming difficult to be away from you, hard to think of anything but you, I said. She blinked but didn't respond, her ears now constantly moving through her hair. I figured you must genuinely care for me, though. You're not stupid enough to date a biochemist just for kicks. I did figure it out after all, I said. You're cold-blooded. Your blood is some type of hemocyanin variant, coloring it green. Your skin almost absorbs light, some ancient evolutionary holdover for camouflage. You're also almost exclusively a carnivore, and your taste palette is rather different than mine if your cooking is anything to go by. I paused and held up a small vial. The last thing was the pheromone. I'm assuming it's a natural product of your body. It calms and entices the male of your species. I'm guessing they are normally more energetic or violent, so the females suppress that instinct once they've mated. It's secreted from that spike in the back of your neck. In human males, or at least in my own case, it made me almost addicted to you. So I synthesized a suppressant. I've been using that on myself. She looked dumbfounded for a moment. You knew? Standing up, she took a hesitant step towards me. How long have you known? She asked. About 6 months, I replied. She paused for a moment. You're immune to the pheromone? She asked. I believe so, I said. "And you haven't said anything?" she asked. I chuckled. "The people who claim they see aliens aren't exactly taken seriously on Earth." She nodded, still appearing stunned. "Are you upset with me?" she asked. Leaning forward, I took her hand. I was a little worried you might get hungry and, well, you know. She glanced down at my hand and then back at me. "I'm on the run. This planet's remote, but I'm one of the last of my kind. The enemy will keep searching for me," she said. I pursed my lips. "Well then, I'm fairly certain you needn't hide in your own home. Go ahead and relax," I said. "Relax?" she asked. "I want to see what you truly look like," I said. She hesitated for a moment, then gripping my hand tighter, closed her eyes. The ears, usually so expressive, moved slightly away from her head. The teeth in her mouth morphed to fit a more predatory diet, and her skin changed to absorb more of the light around her, blurring her edges. Overall, her appearance didn't change much. The familiar arch of her brow, the haircut, her eyes when she opened them were slightly larger and more expressive. She was nervous now. "Do I look all right?" she asked, her voice now with a slight reverberation. I leaned forward and kissed her lips. "You look beautiful." I put the plate down in front of her. She yawned, and her ears almost went flat like a cat's behind her head. As she stretched, the teeth she had kept so well hidden now exposed as she moved. I had to suppress the instinct to shy away. As much as I loved her, those were the teeth of a predator. Suppressing several million years of evolution was rather difficult, but for her, I managed it. She hadn't yet woken up all of the way. What with the cold outside and the fact that caffeine had no effect on her species, it took her a while to wake up. Looking down at the plate, she smiled. "Bacon, pancakes, eggs, and a side of corned beef. Looks perfect," she said. I nodded. "I'm just having some fruit, though. All of this meat is seriously messing up my digestive tract. I'm an omnivore," I said as I took a bite of the apple in my hand. She shuddered, finding it rather amusing that she was acting as if I were biting into a raw, bloody steak, something she now enjoyed, no longer needing to pretend to prefer her meat as cooked as it was. I had learned that her preference was a touch singed, but she would consume a raw piece of beef like I would an apple. "Well, I apologize, but I've had to endure this for an entire year," she said, gesturing towards my apple. "Seriously? Do you know what kind of unpleasant substances can get into plants?" she asked. I stared at her and took an exaggerated bite of my apple. She rolled her eyes and flapped her ears, annoyed with me. "It's a good thing we don't live in California. You're like an opposite hipster vegetarian," I said. She ignored me, instead taking one of the nearly raw bacon strips and tossing it up into the air, catching it in her mouth as it fell. I had been told this was proper etiquette where she was from, but I remained skeptical. "I'll be cooking dinner tonight," she said. I winced, my stomach already rebelling, and she noticed. "You've learned what I like. Now I want to do the same. I'll make something with those brown balls," she said. "Potatoes, and you know what they're called," I corrected. She chuckled. "Yes, but seriously, you're eating something you dug out of the ground." "How is that appealing?" she asked. "You ate a squirrel from the backyard yesterday, and you think potatoes are unpleasant?" I asked. She frowned at me, a piece of bacon hanging from her mouth. "You said I could relax and act natural," she said. "I could have used some warning. One moment you're curled up on top of me for my supposed glorious body heat, as you call it, and the next you're across the yard with Harold hanging out of your mouth," I said. "You named the squirrel?" she asked, amused. "It was the one that kept stealing from the bird feeder, so I had to give it a name," I replied. "Well, now it won't steal from the bird feeder," she said, smiling. The two of us were curled up on the couch, underneath the same blanket, as the episode continued to play. I had turned down the heat in the house just a bit, so she snuggled a little closer to me as we continued through our Netflix queue. "What's so funny?" I asked. "Does he really have to be intimate with every alien?" she asked, pointing at the screen where the old-fashioned sci-fi drama played out. "What's the issue with aliens and intimacy?" I asked, pulling her closer. Her ears twitched, the hair that had begun growing on them now brushing against my face as she moved. "Nothing. But seriously, is that all you humans would do when you first meet an alien?" I shifted slightly to look her in the eyes. "And our first date was different how?" I asked. Her features grew even more indistinct, her version of blushing heightening her camouflage instinct. That was different, she hissed. We were at the restaurant table. What, 5 minutes before you dragged me back to that hotel room you were in? Now that I think about it, the pheromones must have been going crazy since I didn't even consider that you might be stealing my organs. It was 10 minutes and I was desperate, she said, her face still blurring. Well, I guess it's nice to feel needed. She swatted me on the arm underneath the blanket. I was in heat, she growled. I blinked. You're cold-blooded, but you go into heat, that's an odd combo. Well, I'm not technically cold-blooded, and in heat is the best Earth definition, but again, not exactly right either. So we'll just call them approximations, all right? She asked. I nodded. The two of us settled back into the couch to watch the show. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't help myself. So when's the next time you go into heat? I asked. I'm not telling. That should keep you on your toes, she said. Her teeth were hidden away, and had I not known the truth, I would have sworn she was human. I don't get why we're doing this, I said. Because Mira invited me on a double date with her boyfriend, she said. Talia's day job was working at an accounting office. She was very good with numbers and technology, as evidenced by the array she was putting together in the attic to try and call home. She's the secretary for your boss, right? I asked. She nodded. Come on, Kieran, we've got to get moving. It's almost time, she said. I glanced at my phone. The reservation's in an hour, I said as she pushed me towards my closet. We still have to dress you up, she said. I groaned as she led me over to the closet and quickly picked out my clothes. Is the fact that women are obsessed with clothes a universal constant? I asked as she dug through my mess of a closet. Funny, I was going to ask if all men were just pig-headed, she said. Stepping out, she handed me a black button-up shirt and dark jeans. You want me to look dark and mysterious? I asked. She shrugged. I like the color. Black wasn't something really worn on my planet. I've always liked it, though. I nodded and accepted the clothes. She didn't mention her planet that much, and considering everything else, I didn't press for details on it. I had the distinct impression that when it did come up, it was not going to be a happy recounting. Slipping into the ensemble, I gave her a wink. She reached up and messed with my hair. I was apparently going for the windswept look. Ready? I asked as I resisted the urge to straighten the hair back out. Talia nodded. Yep. Double date, I was about ready to put the steakhouse knife through my own hand. Talia appeared to be equally ready to resort to drastic measure to escape the date. Her ears were taped down, but I could still judge her mood from the small movements of her hair around them when we were out. Her ears were no doubt pressed against her head, lying flat, not a good sign. Rafe, Mira's boyfriend, mentioned that he had to redo all the accountant's work due to issues with the accounting software, said the narrator. Rafe had not stopped talking since they sat down, pausing only to stuff as many appetizers into his mouth as possible. Apparently, he was a manager at some office, and the narrator felt bad for any subordinates under his supervision, as he seemed to be a micromanaging type. Thankfully, the service at the steakhouse was prompt, and they were interrupted by the arrival of their food before Rafe could complain about the accounting software. The young, inexperienced waitress hesitantly checked her notes in the table as she served the food. I'm starving, Rafe chuckled, as if making a joke. The narrator blinked, unsure how to respond. A large steak platter? The waitress asked, glancing back at her notes and the sizable dish she was holding. That's mine, said Talia. The waitress paused for a moment, likely puzzled by a woman Talia's size ordering such a substantial meal. The narrator understood as Talia's metabolism was highly efficient, and she required a lot of food. The narrator had previously tried to match Talia's intake when they first started dating, leading to an increase in the gym schedule. All right, Talia began to purr next to the narrator. The waitress quickly distributed the rest of the food, and Rafe gave the narrator's chicken Caesar salad an odd look but said nothing. The narrator was craving salad, as they rarely got their vegetables these days, unlike the bacon-infused cheeseburger they once desired. So, what is it you do for a living? Rafe inquired as he began cutting his overcooked steak. I'm a biochemist, so I work in a lab most days, verifying experiments from other labs to lend authenticity to published papers, I explained. What, like curing cancer and all that? Rafe asked, waving his knife in an exaggerated motion, nearly hitting my shirt with the juices. I'm sure progress will come in time, I said, not wanting to delve into the details of my drug trial work. Talia quickly finished her meal and began picking at the remains of my salad. We could use an escape plan, I murmured to her. Talia glanced at Mira and Rafe, who seemed engrossed in his repetitive talk. Any ideas? She asked. The waitress then tripped, sending a tray of dishes into my lap, spilling steak bones and other food. Talia moved to the other side of the table next to Mira. I'm so sorry, the waitress said, hurrying to collect the dishes. Rafe stood up, a small stain on his shirt. This shirt is ruined, he exclaimed. The other patrons and I gave him a disapproving look, as I was the one with plates in my lap. Rafe, calm down, it was an accident, Mira said. Whatever, I'm not paying for this, he said, dragging Mira out of the restaurant. The place was now almost deadly silent, and the waitress was beet red in the face as she slowly picked the plates out of my lap. Well, that was certainly one way to handle it, I remarked. Talia nodded. Yep. It's all right, these things happen, I said, extending my credit card. Get me a towel and ring this up. The young waitress nodded and, picking up the final dish, ran off. Another waiter quickly came over and handed me a towel. The atmosphere of the place slowly returned to normal. The manager came out and apologized, offering to comp the meal. I insisted on paying on the condition that next time we visit, they make the steaks a little more rare for my girlfriend, who preferred them more bloody. Getting into the car to drive home, Talia took the wheel. As we pulled out of the parking lot, she reached up and quickly removed the tape, holding her ears back. They began to violently twitch. What's up? I asked. You're quite different, she noted. My mother always said I was a unique blossom. She huffed. A man on my world would have acted like Rafe did. Worse, in fact, if a social snafu like that happened. All right, would you want me to act like that? I asked. She shook her head. No, the girl made a mistake. I could smell her stress. I said, I'm dating an alien. I'm not really one for conforming to social norms. Besides, life is too short to freak out over things like that. It also ended what was a disaster of a double date. Talia nodded. Yeah, sorry about that. I guess Mira saw her boyfriend through lavender-tinted glasses. Rose-tinted, I corrected. And that's most relationships. You don't think I'm the best in the world? I asked, joking. She smiled. Maybe. You smell too much like dinner right now, though. I might just take a bite out of you, she said and clicked her teeth forward, letting her jaw relax. I dismissed any romantic notions involving food. Those teeth and the look in her eyes were a little too predatory. I made a terrible, life-altering mistake. We had been relaxing in bed, both of us on our phones. Seeking my warmth, Talia had leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. My hand had absently gone up, and I began running it through her long hair, which masked her ears. Feeling her skull, I could tell it was slightly elongated, like the wrapped skulls of ancient Egyptians. It wasn't dramatic, just a subtle tapering at the very back, where a cluster of nerves apparently formed. She sighed and collapsed into my lap as my hand brushed past that spot. She then insisted I focus on that area, like a cat when you scratch its ears or stomach. It's a little unsettling when your alien girlfriend demands to be petted, baring her teeth when refused. Who do you think they are? Asked Talia. I looked through the peephole again at the two men outside. FBI, CIA, something like that maybe, I replied. She nodded. All right, what should we do? She asked. Go and grab some clothes and the spare money. If we need to run, we'll have to go out the back. Unless they have us surrounded, then I have no idea. The man knocked on the door again. 1 second, I said in a hushed voice, wanting to seem farther from the door. Talia dashed out of the room, and I heard several things fall as she collected everything. Within a minute, she was back, a bag slung over her shoulder. I swallowed and opened the door. The two men looked at me for a moment. Are you Samuel Shepard? Asked the first man. I blinked. No. No, you went one house too far, the two men nodded. All right, thanks. They turned to leave. Who are you again? I asked. We're with the IRS, said one of the men. Ah, all right, have a good day, I said as I closed the door and breathed a sigh of relief. Talia and I exchanged glances, then began to laugh. It had been a long day, and it was dark outside by the time I left work. There had been a chemical spill and misfiled paperwork to deal with, meaning I had hardly gotten any work done despite the long hours. To top it off, Talia had apparently gotten the afternoon off, so I should have been able to spend the time with her. Stepping into the house, I noticed it was very warm, and most of the lights were off. Glancing at my phone, I saw it was a bit early for bed, but Talia might have turned in already. Quietly making my way through the house, I paused as the small living room appeared to be a mass of sheets and blankets. There I spotted Talia curled up in what could only be described as a nest, clutching the pillow I usually slept with. Laying down next to her, I relaxed on the floor. It wasn't the most comfortable, but with the dim lights and her by my side, it was perfect. Talia continued to clutch the pillow, and feeling a little jealous, I put my arms around her. It took a few minutes, but as she felt my body heat, her grip loosened, and in her sleep, she slowly turned and pressed herself against me. Humans make rather peculiar aliens, I remarked, gazing up at the screen displaying the diminutive green creature that had emerged from the swamp to train the young man who had crashed his ship in the muck. What seems to be the issue with him? I inquired. Nothing, I suppose, though he is rather small. Well, you can't fault us for that. We've not encountered any true aliens, unless we count you and the little gray beings. Talia chuckled. Those creatures are even more ridiculous. What sort of species would evolve to be so spindly? I nodded in agreement. Yes, well, that was the start of the alien craze. Since then, we've seen UFOs all over the place, and rumors of lizard people taking over the government. Seriously, how is he just moving things with his mind? What, is there no mystical space force out there? I asked. No, that's absurd, said Talia. Alas, are there no laser swords? Not that I'm aware of. Planet-destroying superweapons? I inquired. Talia hesitated, and I suddenly realized I may have broached a sensitive subject. Reaching up, I began to gently rub her head again, and we both fell silent for a moment. I had gone a bit too far and did not wish to press the issue. No superweapons like that, but there are planet destroyers, ships that fire weapons from orbit, glassing entire cities, with people dying in an instant from the blast. She pulled the blanket up, disappearing underneath it. You needn't discuss it further, I said, now ignoring the movie and chastising myself for my previous remarks. Okay. I slowly edged around the corner, looking in every direction as I did so, trying to locate her. The challenge was that with her natural camouflage in the darkness of the house, she held the advantage. She had turned off nearly all the breakers, leaving the house in darkness, and had even hot-wired the thermostat to keep the dwelling as warm as possible. Talia had also hinted that the counter-agent I had concocted might be ineffective, given the amount of pheromones she was producing. I couldn't really increase the dosage, as the untested counter-agent was already dangerous enough in the normal amount. I could certainly depart the home, but in preparation for this week, I had placed blackout boards over all the windows and fixed them in place. The doors were also bolted shut, containing the two of us in the house, the world outside being blanketed in snow also contributing to the sense of isolation. I hadn't seen Talia since this morning, when she had proceeded to consume most of the food in the fridge, and then vanished to wreak havoc on the electrical systems. She had informed me a fortnight prior that her next heat cycle was imminent, and because she had a permanent mate, it was going to be a little more aggressive. Her species, or at least the females, were only able to ovulate once a year, which on Earth was about once every 10 months, so they were rather aggressive during that period, being more violent than the males of the species to ensure from a biological perspective that time was not wasted. The solution her people used to deal with the time was fairly similar to the one we were employing. Lock the mated pairs together until the heat period ended. I was just hoping I lived. She had apparently been holding back the first time we had gone through this, mostly because it had been her first as well, and that was a muted one compared to the rest. I was uncertain whether I could withstand the full intensity. It had taken me a week to recover from that first date and reconcile a woman who was very demure in public, but an absolute maniac in bed. Something moved in the corner of my vision, and that was the only advantage I had, as small as it was. She had absolutely no night vision, despite her proclivity for darkness, relying on scent and sound for the most part to navigate. Like an owl, her ears would move to channel sounds into her brain at a slight delay, letting her pinpoint the location of objects in the dark. Her sense of smell wasn't anything like a dog's, but it was certainly better than a human's. allowing her to actually follow strong sense. Most men would actually be excited to be in my shoes, or rather socks. I had a girlfriend who was going to want nothing but sex for the next day or so, who also happened to be hunting me. I eased back into the couch, my eyes peeled looking for any other signs of movement. I felt a breeze from behind me, and I whipped around. Talia pounced on me, sending us tumbling to the floor in a heap. Leveraging herself, she held my arms down and leaned closer. "Hek gan tie vin," she said, in what I assumed was her native tongue, apparently forgetting to use English. "You found me," I said, interpreting her words as best I could. Leaning closer, she smiled in a predatory manner. I was going to die, but like the men who fell to the songs of the sirens, I didn't think I would care. We were sitting on the edge of a rocky outcropping, looking out at the rest of the park around us. We had decided to go on a weekend camping trip, something I had not done since I was a little scout. Talia had also been very excited when I mentioned the possibility, so that settled it. "It's a shame there aren't many places like this left," I said. "It's more than I had on my world. We hardly had any plants left," said Talia. I glanced over at her, but she didn't elaborate, and I didn't want to spoil the mood. I looked back out at the forest. Spring had just started, and life was beginning to creep back into the world. I had to admit I wasn't usually one to just sit and stare out at the landscape, but superimposed as a background to Talia, I imagined I wouldn't really grow tired of it. Her ears twitched. She knew I was staring at her, but she didn't say anything. I turned my eyes back to the sunset. Talia leaned down next to me, and we both remained silent as the sun continued to dip down beneath the horizon. "We should get back before it gets too dark," I said. "You've got your freaky night vision, and I've got my nose." "We're fine," she said. "It's going to get colder, too. I thought you wanted to sit next to the fire and make s'mores." She groaned. "It's too cold to move now." Smiling, I stood and quickly pulled her small frame up, holding her in a bridal carry. "I won't carry you like this all the way back." She giggled. "I thought you'd be more macho." "My night vision isn't good if I can't see my feet to use it," I pointed out. She laughed again, and I set her on her feet. She stretched and let out a small yawn. Holding my arm, the two of us quickly made our way back to the campsite in the car. We were cheating when it came to the actual camping, but neither of us were experienced hikers, and the point was to relax, so we had found the most secluded campsite with a road. Talia hadn't had to tape her ears down at all today, which always improved her mood. It was nearly pitch black by the time we reached the camp. Talia grabbed a blanket from the already set-up tent and plopped down in one of the cheap lawn chairs by the fire pit, demanding I start it. Retrieving the matches and other materials, including the s'mores supplies, I leaned down. Thankfully, one of the few things I had paid attention to as a scout was how to make a fire. Every scout was a miniature pyromaniac, after all. I lit the kindling in one go, and soon a proper campfire was burning. I had barely sat down in my chair when Talia, abandoning hers, was in my lap, the blanket wrapped around us both. She picked up the s'mores supplies and glanced back at me. "How do I do this?" I offered. "Can I show you?" "No," she replied. "Last time you didn't help, we had to get a new microwave." I nodded, remembering the explosion caused by the sealed bottle of maple syrup. "Watch, it's simple," I said, laying out the crackers, placing the chocolate on one half, and then using the metal prongs to stick 2 marshmallows on the ends, holding it near the fire. I slowly rotated it, browning the marshmallows, and after a minute, pulled it out and assembled the s'more. She watched, and I held out the treat. "An American invention," she remarked. "We like our treats simple and quick, with plenty of sugar." She frowned but leaned forward, taking a bite and squeezing the cracker, nearly spilling the molten marshmallow onto her lap. "More?" she asked. "Yes, please." A piercing cry jolted me from sleep, my instincts instantly recognizing the sound of distress. Adrenaline surging, I tightened my grip around Talia, who was buried in the sleeping bag atop me, shielded from the cold. The cry repeated, and I realized it was coming from her. "Talia!" I opened the bag and shook her. After a moment, the cry subsided and she opened her eyes. "You okay?" I asked. Her eyes were red and she seemed on the verge of tears. "I'm fine," she said, turning away and hiding her face against my chest. I held her, running my hands through her hair, trying to soothe her as muffled sobs reached me. I could only guess that the nightmare was connected to her past and the reasons she left her home planet. As the sun began to rise, Talia moved, carefully keeping the sleeping bag sealed against the cold morning air. "Can you open the tent?" she asked. I carefully extracted my arm and unzipped the tent, wincing as the full brightness of the rising sun filtered through the trees around our campsite. We both quietly watched. "I never got to see this on my planet," she said. I looked back at her, and she continued to gaze out at the sun. "I was born just after the war. Your planet managed to avoid what happened to mine, just barely. On my world, the nuclear weapons fell. Afterwards, the things we had been fighting over seemed meaningless. And for the first time in my planet's history, we were united, just to survive in the wake of what we had done. There was so much dust in the atmosphere of my world. It was so cold, so dark, that you could barely make out the difference between day and night." She took a breath, but I remained silent as she spoke. "We were rebuilding. I grew up in that cold blackness. But we could see the light at the end of the tunnel. We were recovering, the dust was settling, and plants were starting to grow again. By the time I was a grandmother, I would have been able to see the sunset of my own planet." She fell silent, then turned to look at me. "I would have seen it." Tears now streamed down her face, and trying to maintain her composure, she put her head back down on my chest, her arms around me, pulling herself as close as she could, her impeccably kept nails digging into my back. "Then they came," she spat. "It was just a day after my—" She frowned, apparently searching for the words. "There's no translation, but the closest thing would be my coming-of-age party when I turned about 20. They came down in ships, massive carriers. They landed just outside the remnants of our cities. Like your people, we had long hoped we were not alone, that the universe was teeming with life, entire federations of power, of species living together in harmony." She paused, taking a breath. "We should have known reality is far crueler. When our representatives went out to greet them, the aliens attacked. They looked like us but had vivid red skin, no hair on their heads, and hands with only 3 fingers. They marched through what was left of the cities on my world, killing anyone in their path." She fell silent. I swallowed, unsure how to respond. "You fought them, though, right?" I asked. Talia snorted, and her ears stood straight up. "Of course we did. I fought them for 5 years as they took over my planet. Guerrilla warfare is what you call it, and I killed dozens of them with my own hands." She brought her hands out of the sleeping bag and held them in front of herself. "We fought even as they took over our world. They were cleaning our atmosphere and replacing what little life had survived on my world with their own, the plants and the animals. They had millions, us only a few thousand. They were slowly erasing what was left of us from the surface of our planet." Talia sat up, peeling off the sleeping bag. "I must step away for a moment," she said, hurrying out of the tent, leaving me to process all she had shared. Talia had disappeared into the woods over an hour ago, presumably to attend to personal needs. Her natural camouflage and lack of clothing made any attempt to follow futile. So I began preparing breakfast. 2 pounds of bacon, ham, corned beef, and oatmeal, her favorite. "Breakfast," I called into the empty forest, and Talia materialized before me, her camouflage abilities astounding. I offered her some clothes, which she slipped on, then she settled into her chair by the extinguished fire. We ate in silence, a marked contrast to her usual enthusiasm. "What happened next?" I asked. She looked up. "You wish to know? I told you I've taken lives. You were fighting as anyone would, against an invading force. Surely every human would do the same." She smiled. "You might actually prevail. I've studied your history. Humans are far more violent than my people ever were. You understand the horrors of war, which is why you've not used nuclear weapons on each other." "Well, it's good to know we have some things figured out," I replied. She nodded and continued eating, then shared, "We knew we were losing, so we stole alien ships over the years to fight them. The resistance made a final assault, and we escaped our homeworld in the stolen craft. My ship was damaged, and the others with me were killed. Then I crashed here, and you know the rest." "So that array, the one you're building, is meant to try and communicate with the rest of your people?" I inquired. "Yes, I'm a Vacurian, and we had a channel set aside, one we hoped the aliens weren't using. But so far, I've heard nothing." She hesitated. "I can't abandon my people." I poked at my food. I suppose I shouldn't want you to hear anything then? I slowly opened my eyes to see Talia hovering over me, making my already labored breathing more difficult. The camping trip, as enjoyable as it had been, had left me with an unpleasant souvenir, a nasty cold. Probably had something to do with the woman who had decided to monopolize my body heat as we slept. But it didn't matter now. The illness had struck the day after our return, and I felt miserable. Talia, I nudged her, and she opened her eyes, her ears going back as she yawned and looked up at me. You're so warm, she exclaimed. Not a good thing, and it's hard enough breathing as it is, I said, reprimanding her. She sat up, unperturbed. I'll make some dinner. No more ordering in. I slowly nodded, lacking the energy to argue about her culinary skills. Something simple, please. My stomach can't handle anything too flavorful right now. Talia smiled and practically bounced out of the room, exuding an excess of energy. She sat down next to me and tentatively held out the broth. I looked at it, unable to really detect any strong scents, but the grayish color suggested a simple, unadorned soup. What's this? I asked. Dinner, come on! I worked hard on this, she said, scooping some of the broth and blowing on it to cool it before holding the spoon out to me. Tentative as I usually was when it came to her cooking, I took a small sip, a little salty, but otherwise fairly bland. It's good, but I can feed myself, I said, reaching for the bowl. She recoiled, making sure to keep the bowl steady. No, if this is going to work, your mate has to feed it to you. It's an old tradition on my world. The healthy mate feeding the sick mate the healing broth. All right then, I said, half out of curiosity and half out of exhaustion. She smiled and continued feeding me. It's curious. Your culture seems to have similar traditions. We're not going to get to play this out, though, since I'm not going to get sick on your world, she said. I asked about other shared traditions, and she mentioned the New Year's celebration and mating cycles. She shook her head and smiled. Since I'm in your world, I should follow your customs. Why not do both? We could have double the holidays. What's the upcoming one? I asked. Talia thought about it for a moment. We're moving into spring, right? Yes. Then we need to clean out our home and rid ourselves of the clutter from the cold winter. On second thought, maybe not, I groaned. The prospect of even getting out of bed was too much at the moment. Talia smiled and fed me another spoonful of the soup, and I relaxed. It was pleasant having someone care for me, even if I did feel unwell. It was challenging. Finding all the right ingredients to make this, though. I had to substitute some things to make it work, said Talia. Really, what was difficult to find? I asked. Eyeballs for one. I had to go clear across town to find them at this cute little shop with different letters on it. Chinatown, I think it was, said Talia. I glanced down at the soup. I was usually rather adventurous with food, but the combination of the nausea from being sick and the revelation that the soup had eyeballs in it was a little too much. Moving the sheets aside, I tried to make it to the bathroom. It was still dark when I opened my eyes, the street lamp's lights outside the only illumination streaming in around the curtains. A cooing was coming from behind me, and it took me a moment, but I recognized it as Talia's native language. Her speaking was lyrical, with a slow, steady beat behind the words she was saying. She was singing, and I had never heard her sing in English or her own language before, but her voice was beautiful. I didn't understand the words, but their emotional weight was clear. I listened as she repeated it several times, until her voice trailed off and she let out a small sob. I couldn't remain still any longer. My own eyes were tearing up, and I had no idea what she had been saying. It had been sad, whatever it was. Slowly I moved until I was sitting next to her on the bed. She turned away from me, trying to hide her face. That melody was quite lovely, she said. It's just an old lullaby, something mothers would sing to their children, or before my people went into battle. It's older than even my nation was. I asked, what's it about? She shook her head. Warriors and lovers. In my culture, it was considered more honorable to go into battle with your mate beside you, so that if one died on the battlefield, the other would exact vengeance and follow. I put my arms around her. So both the men and women would fight? She nodded. A mother will fight more ferociously than any father when her child is at risk. Why not leverage that? I smiled. Humans are still figuring that one out, but I think I like your way better. Talia turned to look at me. Are you feeling better? I didn't wake you, did I? She asked, sounding anxious. I took a deep breath, breathing through my nose. I'm feeling better. Her ears happily wiggled. Good. I have something I'd like to share with you. Getting up from the bed, momentarily distracting me with a rather revealing outfit she had decided to go to bed in, she dashed out of the room, only to return in a few moments with a small piece of technology in her hands. She handed it to me, and I looked at it, finding a small button on the back, which I pressed. The screen lit up, and buttons fluidly rose up from it. This is? I asked as I experimentally touched one of the small buttons, which felt very much like the ones on my laptop. My tablet, from home, she said. I nodded and examined it, and despite its alien nature, it looked remarkably similar to an Earth-based tablet. From what she had told me, her people had just about reached our level of technology before bombing themselves and being invaded. The tablet had a fair amount of wear on it, but besides the buttons rising from the screen, it operated like any other tablet. What do you want to show me? I asked. My world, as devastated as it was from the wars of my own people, it was home. She pulled up a photograph on the display, showing a group of people all gathered in a street with lights strung up over them, crisscrossing from building to building and emitting a soft glow. The surroundings appeared worn, yet well-maintained and tidy. Behind the figures in the foreground stood a skyline reminiscent of New York, with several of the tallest buildings missing significant portions. The Valkyrians in the image all displayed wide, happy smiles, their ears pointed straight up, a gesture I had come to understand as a sign of great contentment. This was my first encounter with a male member of their species, and while he seemed slightly larger than me, it may have simply been due to the individual depicted. These are my parents, she said, gesturing to the two figures at the back of the photograph. Talia bore a striking resemblance to her mother, save for the mother's wrinkles and chipped tooth. The father, the largest in the frame, had a resolute yet not unkind expression on his face. And are these your siblings? I asked, looking at the other, smaller Valkyrians in front of the parents. Yes, this picture was taken just before the aliens arrived, she replied, taking the tablet and slowly flipping through more images of her homeworld. The sky in every picture was a constant gray, like a perpetually overcast day. To combat this, lights were strung up everywhere. The people appeared weary yet content, their lives not ones of luxury, but neither were they destitute or dying in the remnants of their home. I noticed variations in the Valkyrians' coloration, with some having hair that combined shades of blonde, black, and other hues, never exceeding 3. Their skin tones ranged from slightly paler to somewhat darker than rogues, and some displayed teeth that curved slightly outward. Is the hair coloration natural or a style choice? I inquired. Natural. It was a divisive factor on my world, I said, turning to her. Hair color divided your people? I asked. Is that so strange? Your own history has examples, with your nation discriminating based on skin pigment. I nodded. True. It's odd how people focus on the smallest differences. We're all sentient beings. I paused and Talia raised an eyebrow, her left ear twitching slightly. I mean, we're all human, I corrected. Talia giggled. I knew what you meant. She looked at the tablet and navigated to a different folder, opening it with a tap. The final few pictures seemed to depict the interior of a small craft. Is this your spacecraft or the one you took? I asked. Talia nodded. Yeah. Where is that thing anyway? Area 51? No, it's in orbit of your moon. I've got a remote to call it back, if I need to. None of our military tech could pick it up, and considering your military didn't ambush me the moment I landed, I guess they can't either. Talia switched back to the first group of photos showing her family, and for several minutes, both of us were silent. Have you heard anything? I asked. Not yet. She reached into the aisle and pulled out a small bottle, colored a garish pink and baby blue with some cartoon character on the front of it. Bubble bath. Pour that in when you're drawing a bath and you get bubbles. She looked at me confused for a moment and then back at the bottle. Does it help you get cleaner in some way? No, it's mostly targeted at children. Still, I took the bottle out of her hand and put it into the cart, If you haven't had a bubble bath in your life, it's something you should try. Talia's hair twitched. Her ears were moving as she tried to figure something out. You're just hoping to see me in the bath, aren't you? If that's what I wanted, I wouldn't suggest a bubble bath. You can't see anything through them, I replied. She shrugged, an expression that she had picked up, and we continued down the shopping aisle, quickly picking up the things we both needed. I'm a perfectly capable cook. It's your peculiar tastes that are the issue. With all those plant-based items in your diet, she said, tossing the bags of lettuce and other vegetables into the refrigerator, with a look that suggested they might burst into flames. You eat things that contain plant matter, like cake, for example. I replied, yeah, I can eat it. Doesn't mean my stomach agrees with it, though. Besides, cake has eggs and milk in it, she countered. I rolled my eyes but remained silent. We continued our stroll through the store, with Talia particularly drawn to the snacks, grabbing several types of jerky and processed meat sticks. I selected potato chips, which she utterly deplored due to their processed vegetable nature and the loud crunching sounds they made when I ate them. I suggested she try some teas, but to my dismay, Talia was more interested in the energy drinks than green or mint teas. After those cans found their way into the cart, I hastily made my way to the checkout lanes. Vicurians cannot bake cake without setting off smoke alarms. They do, however, love bubble baths. In the future, to prevent the bathroom from being entirely covered in suds, Vicurians should refrain from consuming beverages to aid their flight before taking baths. Talia jumped, causing the bowl of popcorn I was eating to go flying across the room, the large bag of jerky she had been loudly consuming following its trajectory through the air. I had been anticipating this, and as horrible as it was, I couldn't resist. In space, no one could hear you scream, but on Earth, I could certainly hear Rouge's shriek. On the screen, the vicious little creature was making its way out of the man's chest cavity, much to the horror of the other protagonists. I told you this was a scary movie, I said, putting my arm around Talia, who was now hiding under the blankets, still staring at the screen. You're an asshole, she said. This is a classic. Talia slowly disentangled herself from the blankets, grumbling to herself in her own language, and went across the room to retrieve her snacks, leaving my half-eaten bowl of popcorn on the floor. As she resettled, I quickly snatched a piece of the jerky and popped it into my mouth. Talia gave my arm a light swat, but said nothing more, instead simply nestling back into my embrace. Warriors and maidens continue the fight, carrying each other through the night. The home lies in ruins, coated in frost. The food, old and rotten, lies cold and forgotten. Yet the warriors and maidens press on, supporting one another through the darkness. The light approaches, the night's end near. Those warriors and maidens who no longer fight will be laid to rest in eternal night. The warrior and maiden will always fight, if only to carry each other through the night. I looked through the binoculars at the aliens, who had established their base just outside the city. As they cleared blocks and expanded their perimeter, it became increasingly difficult to gather intelligence on their activities. It had taken me nearly the entire day to reach this vantage point, one of the taller buildings on the city's outskirts that they had not yet destroyed. Anything new? Darren asked. I felt my ears twitch in irritation, and he sighed. My apologies. I'll check back in an hour. Did you find anything useful? I inquired. Found some more wire, but that was low priority. Came across a few tablets and computers. No idea if they'll work, but nothing else worthwhile. Turned away from it, disgusted, and ducked down to grab my water bottle when the half wall I'd been leaning on exploded inwards. I watched him fall. It happened so fast I couldn't even take a step. I didn't even try to help him. I could have saved him. I could have. You okay? Asked Kieran. I lay in the bed of an alien on an alien world. My people missing. Aliens occupying my home. The painful memories overwhelmed me, reopening old wounds, and I began to weep. Kieran lay beside me, the natural satellite's light reflecting on his face. He remained silent as I cried. Tentatively, he reached out, offering his embrace, the warmth of his body. For a fleeting, absurd moment, I nearly turned away. He was an alien, and it was aliens who had taken my world. But looking into his eyes, I saw genuine emotion, a desperation and fear almost as acute as my own. Slowly, I inched closer, hiding my face. His arms encircled me, and I shivered. the exotic comfort of his warmth. Another sob escaped my lips, and Kieran held me tighter. I wished he would never let go. "I've ridden in spaceships. I don't think this will be so bad," said Talia. I smiled. "Well then, what's with your ears?" I asked. She frowned and pulled her knit hat down further. "You can't see them. But I've gotten good at spotting them, even when hidden." She rolled her eyes. "Fine, I'm a little scared. We never had these on my world. It seems recklessly crazy. It's fun." We moved forward in the line, and Talia watched the station come into view with interest. "Those are some serious restraints. Are you sure this isn't dangerous?" she asked, eyeing the people strapped into the train. "That's so the operators don't get sued. You don't need something that serious. Look at the older ones. They look seriously scary." Talia nodded, and we stepped onto the platform. Sitting in the plastic seat, I turned to her. She stared straight ahead, the restraints already secured. Her hands gripped the handholds, her skin flushed slightly green instead of the human red, though not enough for anyone to notice but me. The attendant quickly checked the restraints on everyone, momentarily bending my arm at an odd angle. I placed my hand on hers. "You'll either love it or hate it. Most people don't feel indifferent about roller coasters." She gave me a withering look. "That's very reassuring. Whoa!" The train moved forward, and I laughed as she grasped my hand. As we climbed the hill, the old chain beneath us rattled loudly, the ride's music and the sounds of the people around us competing with the wind. Talia's eyes widened, and she let out a high-pitched scream as we plummeted down the first hill. Though I was focused on her, we rode through several quick turns, a loop, and a few corkscrews. Her initial terror soon gave way to an expression of almost childlike delight. As we exited the ride, Talia slowly released my hand and let out a nervous laugh. "So what did you think?" I asked. "You people are insane," she replied. "You want to ride another?" "Hell yes," she exclaimed, though she looked miserable, shivering from the brief splash of water. Chuckling, I sat down next to her. Talia leaned against me, wrapping her arms around me. "What made you decide to surprise me with this outing?" she asked. "I think we both know why. Do you want to talk about it?" Talia shook her head. "They're just memories. We lost people fighting those aliens, and more than a few times I nearly died fighting them." She pressed her face against my chest, her voice barely audible when she spoke next. "The faces of those I killed still haunt me more often than the ones we lost." I placed my hand on her head, gently scratching. "You were fighting for your home. No one would say what you did was wrong. At least you still see them as people, unlike those who stormed your world and tried to destroy you." "I suppose so," she murmured, falling silent. We both watched the crowd passing by, teenagers holding hands, children darting about, adults indulging in treats. Despite the partially cloudy sky and slight chill, it was a tranquil day. "Have you ever thought about having children?" she asked, her ears perking up beneath the hat. I blinked, surprised by the question. "I hadn't really considered it. Unless we're both mistaken about biology, it's not possible for us. Why do you ask?" Talia's voice was hesitant. "Everyone I knew had large families, to rebuild the population. I'm just curious what you think about it." I swallowed nervously. "I never pictured it before meeting you, and afterwards it wasn't an option, so I didn't dwell on it. I wouldn't be unhappy without children, but I wouldn't mind having them either." She turned her face away. "We can't have kids, and you have to hide me from everyone. At some point, you might not want to do that anymore." I pondered her words. "Are you worried I might grow tired of you?" She shrugged. "I'm constantly waking you. I'm not human. You deserve someone who brings you joy. And if that's not me, I don't want you to stay because you think I need you. I managed just fine on your planet before we met." "Talia," I said, wrapping my arms around her and pulling her closer. "You're on a planet full of strangers, and I'm the only one here who understands what you are. It's natural to feel afraid, but I can assure you, I have no intention of leaving you." Talia was silent for a moment. "What if I hear from my people? I have to return to them, and I won't take you with me." "Why not?" "Because we're going to war. It's not your fight. You can live happily on this planet for the rest of your life." I nodded slowly. "At this point, I'll only be truly happy on a world where you are." That sounds like a cheesy line, she grumbled. I laughed. Maybe in a few centuries, but I'm serious. If I want to ensure the woman I love doesn't have to face an intergalactic war alone, I'm more than content to leave Earth behind. We were both in bed, immersed in literature from each other's cultures. Talia was making her way through classics, particularly enjoying Tolkien, whose works her people had apparently never encountered before. I was progressing at a slower pace through what amounted to an encyclopedia, mostly cultural documents and analyses. My motivations were not purely out of curiosity, however, as keeping the subject of my research secret from her proved challenging due to my need for translation and context, slowing my progress. I yawned and set the tablet aside. Ready to get some sleep? I asked. Just a few more pages, Talia replied. I closed my eyes and relaxed, sliding down on the bed. After a short while, Talia set down her book, turned off the lamp, and joined me, and we quickly drifted off to sleep in each other's embrace. She woke me up at 3 a.m, her arms moving wildly as she dreamed, her skin rippling in and out of her natural camouflage, and the single ear protruding from her hair twitching violently. I watched as she continued to struggle, whether over the loss of another friend or against an unseen foe. I desperately wanted to wake her, but I knew that would only worsen the situation, ripping her from the dream. I feared this was developing into some form of PTSD, given her experiences of war, escape, and landing on an alien world. I glanced down at my phone and then back towards the restaurant entrance. I had a feeling this wouldn't go well. It had been a stressful week. The lab samples were contaminated, my car got scratched, and my phone cracked. I had joined the dating site after my breakup with Courtney months ago, not expecting much. Most matches were underwhelming, but one woman, Talia, seemed promising. We agreed to meet here, and she was running late. As I started to stand up, ready to leave, a voice called out, "Kieran?" I looked up and was struck by the woman's beauty, far more stunning than her profile picture. "Yes," I managed to say. She smoothly sat down across from me. "I'm Talia." I reached to shake her hand, but in my flustered state, I knocked over a glass of water, spilling it on the table. Sorry." I quickly tried to clean up the mess, feeling my face flush with embarrassment. 2 minutes into our first date since Courtney, and I was already acting like a complete fool in front of the most attractive woman I'd ever met. She laughed, and immediately I felt my ears burn. "It's fine." She quickly shrugged off her jacket and put her hand on mine. "It's nice to meet you." The fact that her hand was on mine and that underneath her coat, she was wearing a very tight black dress short-circuited my brain. The foreign accent, wherever it was from, didn't help much either. It was sexy as hell. Very inappropriate images began to run through my mind with wild abandon, not at all restrained by the part of my brain that would usually try to rein such fantasies in. "Nice to meet you too," I nodded. She glanced down at the mess on the table and took a deep breath. I quickly noticed that she was a little flushed, and her hair around her ears was sticking up slightly. Perhaps she was as frazzled as I was. "So, where are you from?" I asked. "Far away. I just moved here," she replied. Well, what do you think so far?" She frowned. "It's nicer than where I came from. Lots of people. Is that a good thing?" "It is," she said. Both of us fell silent, and a waiter finally getting to our table took the napkins and replaced the waters. Talia squirmed in her seat slightly, as if she was uncomfortable. I was hesitant to say anything. The rather inappropriate images gallivanting around the inside of my skull were only increasing in their complexity. "You want to get out of here?" Talia asked. "What?" I replied, caught off guard. "I'm in a hotel right now while I sort some things out. You want to come back with me?" she asked. I had long been somewhat timid when it came to matters of the heart and interactions with women. My previous experience with Courtney and her trust issues was evidence enough of that. Seeing the strength in Talia's eyes spurred me on, giving me the resolve to not let this woman slip away from my life. For once, I cast aside my concerns about the consequences and took the risk. "Sure," I replied. We stood up and the two of us departed the restaurant, embarking on a future that neither of us anticipated, but which we would embrace together. March 3rd, 2021. As I gazed up at the night sky, I found myself with a greater appreciation for the moon, ever since Talia had entered my life. It was our closest celestial neighbor, and the only one we had visited so far, imbuing it with a certain charm. It represented what we could accomplish and what we were destined to do. It was the gateway to the stars and the people living among them. Talia's ears perked up, and she quickly straightened. "What?" I asked, recognizing the signs of alarm. She bolted from my lap without a word, darting into the backyard. I doubted the squirrels were making a return, considering how many she had caught, so I quickly followed her. In the moonlight, I had to keep my eyes focused on Talia's clothes, as her skin was phasing in and out of her camouflage. She favored darker-toned garments, making it still not entirely easy, but I was able to pick her out in the darkness. "Hello," Talia said to something at her feet, in a tone I had never heard her use before. She was speaking to something at her feet, and stooping down, she quickly collected whatever it was. Hurrying back toward me, I blinked as I gazed at the small ball of fur in her hands, a little jet-black kitten that couldn't be more than 5 weeks old, just old enough to have been weaned. The little thing looked healthy enough, but it was clearly not happy with its current situation, expressing its discontent with little disgruntled growls. "I found a kitten!" She held the small creature out to me, the kitten letting out another pitiful meow. "Yes, you did, but we're not keeping it." "Yes, we are. She's named Sasha." I took a moment to mentally adjust. "Darkness, that may be in your language, but it's still not a very original name. We're not keeping a kitten." "Yes, we are," said Talia, as she raised the small ball of fur and chaos to her cheek. The kitten seemingly realizing the alien was its best bet for affection and rubbing up against her, purring. Talia's own purrs quickly joined in. "No?" "Yes." "We'll keep it for the night, then make sure it has a good home." "We are not keeping it," I said. Both Talia and the small kitten gave me a look that told me I was completely wrong. May 26, 2021. I woke to the contented purring of the two creatures that had effectively taken over my life. Talia was, from what I could tell, hugging most of my lower body, her head resting on my stomach. Sasha was curled up on my chest, a ball of fur that I knew could unleash claws and attack me at any moment. Slowly, so as not to disturb either of the vicious creatures, I picked up Talia's tablet and continued reading through everything. Reaching out, she began to stroke Sasha, who, realizing it was Talia petting her, promptly uncurled and pushed her head into Talia's hand. For several minutes, we all simply basked in the moment. These were the times that had made me realize I was truly in love with Talia. To simply be with someone without even feeling the need to speak, to just enjoy being with that person. Her being an alien was just a part of who she was, like her skin color or hair. "I have to go out and run some errands today. When will the two of you release me?" Talia smiled and shifted slightly, causing the sheet covering her body to fall away and expose her skin to the sun in my eyes. "Are you sure you want to leave?" she asked, feigning innocence. It took me a moment to recover from her very obvious yet not unappreciated distraction. "No, but I have to get them done at some point." "Later then," Talia said, pushing the kitten off my chest. The complacent feline promptly hopped off the bed and quickly walked out of the room, no doubt to claw up another corner of the couch. Talia leaned forward and planted a kiss on my lips, and I didn't care what the cat was doing to the stupid couch for the next few hours or so. "What is it you are looking for?" asked the jeweler. I looked up from the display in front of me. He was dressed impeccably in a suit, a stark contrast to my jeans and t-shirt, but I paid it no mind. "Titanium? What do you have in titanium?" I asked. The man frowned. "What specifically are you looking for?" I pulled out the rough sketch I had made, copied from Talia's tablet. A cuff bracelet of sorts, fitted to go over the forearm. The man picked up my rough sketch. "And you said you wanted this made of titanium? That would make it quite expensive in raw material alone." "That's fine. Do you know where I can get a bracelet like it?" The man considered me for a moment. "I would have to call our warehouse. If you're willing to pay a stocking fee, I can have a selection of bracelets like this in by tomorrow." I produced my credit card. "So you'd like the meat to be only lightly cooked?" inquired the proprietor. I nodded. "2 meals, actually. I'll need mine a bit more well done, but my girlfriend is foreign and her biggest complaint about American cuisine is that we overcook our meat." The owner smiled and gestured. "We get requests like that quite often. Is she French?" "Something along those lines," I replied. The man chuckled. All right, any other special requirements? We'll need a heater on the deck, as it's not supposed to be cold, but she's anemic and gets chilled easily. That can be arranged. Other than that, I'm not sure. What do people typically do? The man leaned back. I could try to upsell you on a lot of extras, but neither of you would likely remember it, and I get the sense it wouldn't matter much to you. What makes you say that? The owner smiled. This isn't a cheap place, and if you don't mind me saying, you don't look flush with cash. This will be special enough without any extra frills. The embellishments are for the wealthy and their arm candy. I can't charge the truly smitten ones those kinds of fees. How can you tell we're truly in love? The older man reclined. I can tell. You both look as giddy as I felt back then. You at least love her, so I'm betting she loves you too. Arriving home that night, I found the house dark, much like when Talia was at the peak of her cycle. Stepping inside, I slowly crept through the dim hallways. Talia? I called softly, unsure of the situation. A thud and a yowl. Glancing down the hall, I barely glimpsed the black blur of the cat darting away, with Talia chasing close behind, nearly as indistinct in the darkness. Sasha rushed into the living room with Talia right behind her, and soon I heard another crash. Tentatively, I walked into the room and turned on the light. The couch was on its side, and one of the cheaper side tables that usually held the TV remotes and other items was crushed beneath Talia, who was squeezing the cat against her. Sasha looked thoroughly displeased, but seemed unable to scratch at Talia. What's going on? I asked, unsure if I really wanted to know. Talia smiled. I'm teaching her how to hunt. She released the cat, which instead of turning on her, leapt out of Talia's arms and darted towards me. Backing away, I stumbled over something and fell on the floor, the cat hissing at me once before streaking back into the depths of the house. What did I do? I asked, but the cat didn't answer. Slowly, I got back to my feet. Did you finish all the things you needed to do? Asked Talia. I nodded. Yes, and I also made dinner reservations for us at that Italian place down by the water next Saturday. Talia's eyes lit up. Oh, how fancy, she exclaimed. You mean this actually happened? She asked. I nodded. It's based on true events. Hollywood had to cut some of the danger from the Apollo 13 mission. There were so many things that went wrong. It's a miracle they made it back. That's true. Yet we never managed to land on anything by our own means. You did send out probes like us, and from what I've read, you had people in orbit during your conflicts, just as we did during our own. I guess humans were fortunate in that regard. Absolutely, looking back on things like Apollo is just astonishing. We went to the moon with less computing power than what's in my pocket. It's amazing to think about the incredible things humans will accomplish in space, said Talia. I sighed and turned my gaze to the movie, where the three astronauts were just beginning to re-enter the atmosphere. The music was fading to silence, and for the next few minutes, both of us watched in quiet contemplation. That's if we can get through the endless bureaucracy, I grumbled. That seems to be a universal constant. Everyone dislikes politicians. Sasha was curled up against me, and I was curled up against Kieran. For some reason, despite having only a dinner date planned, Kieran had been anxious and apprehensive all day. He'd gotten an early start, mowing the lawn and pruning the plants outside. After that, he'd come inside and begun cleaning everything he could. All of that before lunch, where he'd even managed to burn the food. His nervousness was rubbing off on me, and I had tried to entice him into the bedroom for some stress relief, but he had refused, saying his stomach was upset. You all right? I asked. He placed his hand on my head, and for a moment I reveled in the touch. I'm fine. Just a bit of an upset stomach, that's all. Do you want to cancel the dinner reservations? I asked. He paled. No, I'll be fine. Surprised by the intensity of his response, I simply nodded. For several minutes, neither of us spoke, and I absently stroked Sasha as she continued to purr. I'm going to go get ready for the dinner, said Kieran as he jumped up to his feet, startling Sasha, who bolted from her position against me and hissed at Kieran before darting from the room. I glanced at the clock. We've got 5 hours until our reservations. Kieran nodded. I still need to shower, shave, get dressed. All that stuff, he said, smiling and looking a bit nervous. All right, I said, a little put off by his enthusiasm. He hadn't been like this since our second date when he thought I was going to pull him away from the dinner table again for a rather intimate tryst in a hotel room. I had done that, but not before we had actually finished the meal. Lounging back on the couch and petting Sasha, who had quickly returned now that Kieran had left, I considered what might have him so nervous, and my heart quickened. Was he breaking up with me? Was he tired of dealing with me? I couldn't really blame him if he was. I'd asked him to deal with quite a lot after all. I was an alien on his planet, and at any moment the government here could find us. The aliens who attacked my homeworld could track me down, or even attack his own planet. Or maybe he was sick of me not reacting like a human female might. I was aware things were a little different, but I had always, though, he found them endearing. Huh? Kieran rose from his seat, then sank to one knee. I moved to help him up, but the look on his face was unlike any I'd seen before. Talia, I love you. I love you too, I said, puzzled by his actions. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. He reached under the table, and I gasped as he held up the metal bands. The mating pledges. I'm combining our traditions, Talia. Will you be my wife? I stared at him, too stunned to move. Earlier I had feared he was growing tired of me, or of dealing with an alien as a partner. Now he was kneeling before me, the mating pledge extended. With trembling hands, I reached out and took the featureless metal band. Talia? Asked Kieran. Yes. The words escaped me before I could stop them, and they were not wrong. Kieran smiled and quickly adopted the traditional pose from my planet, mirroring the one he had just been in. Carefully, I took the metal band he offered and mirrored him, my hand over his right arm, the band pressed against his skin. The other band he now held was over my right arm. Then I claim you as my own, he said in my language. Just as I claim you. We pressed down on each other's arms, the metal bands bending slightly and sliding on. For a moment I could only stand there, dazed by the turn of events and happier than I had ever been. Kieran pulled me close and planted a passionate kiss on my lips. I embraced him tighter. I had thought I would never be happy again. My world was gone, and I was losing hope of ever seeing my people once more. I was countless miles from home, and I was possibly the last of my kind, and I was in love with an alien. I wouldn't have it any other way. For the first time, as Kieran and I continued to kiss, I considered turning off the small antenna array in the attic. I lay down on the couch, pushing Sasha aside and ignoring her indignant hiss and swipe at my face with her claws. For several minutes I stewed and gazed up at the ceiling. I had no idea why she was being so stubborn about this. Grumbling, I turned over and pounded the couch, trying to soften it. The thing was comfortable enough to sit on, and the two of us had fallen asleep on it plenty of times. But for some reason, the damn thing felt like it had rocks in it. Now, staring at the back of the couch, I tried to calm myself down. It was stupid, whatever it had been we were arguing over. My fault or hers, now out here on the couch, it just seemed so foolish. It took me a long time to fall asleep on the couch. Standing in front of the coffee pot, I watched as the coffee dripped down into the reservoir. I had barely gotten any sleep, and the sleep I had gotten felt as if it had only been a few minutes long, which was strange considering Talia and I had slept together on the couch plenty of times and had only a few knotted backs to work out. Talia trudged into the kitchen and I turned to her. She looked as miserable as I felt. Her ears were drooping down and her eyes were slightly tinged with green, her version of bloodshot. Without a word, I poured her a cup of coffee and held it out to her. She took the beverage and slowly went to sit at the table. Pouring myself a cup, I went and sat down across from her. For several minutes, the two of us couldn't meet one another's eyes. For once, the horrible instant coffee and old chipped mugs were the most interesting thing in the room. Finally, I looked up at her. I'm sorry. She glanced up from her coffee. Me too. We both took several more sips of the acrid brew. What were we arguing about? Asked Talia. Something we thought was important. I can't recall what it was, I said. Me neither. We sat in silence for a few more minutes. You don't appear to have slept much, said Talia. The couch was lumpy. You don't look rested either. Talia shook her head. No, the bed was cold. There are extra blankets in the closet. She nodded. That's not what I meant. Same when I said the couch was lumpy. Talia put her mug down. I'm still tired. We're both calling in sick today. I need to get some sleep. I put down my half-empty mug as well. All right. Talia and I curled back up in the bed as the sun began to rise, while the rest of the world set about waking up and getting ready for the day. We relaxed with one another, finally able to get some sleep in each other's arms. I smiled and pulled her closer. Everything felt right. Over 100 people perished? I said. Talia nodded, and more than 200 injured. Whatever reaction took place, it was plainly much more powerful than anything we've ever worked with before. I didn't comment on Talia's wording, as she was beginning to think of herself as part of humanity, not forgetting her heritage but having spent a significant amount of her life on Earth. Standing up and going to my desk, I pulled out Talia's ancient tablet and turned it on. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "You pulled data from the shuttle, and while neither of us can translate that, we can see the pictures well enough. I've been looking through the alien data." I paused, finding the right page. Slowly, I held the tablet up to Talia, her eyes widening as she looked at it and then at the television screen. The methods of delivery were different in artistic style, but the malformed particle on the television was unmistakably the same as in the alien data files. "Humanity is catching up," said Talia, a vicious smile on her face. "April 12th, 2033. Talia." She groaned and moved away from me. Rolling my eyes and adjusting my shoulder strap, I poked her harder. "What?" she said, opening her eyes. "We're here." Talia blinked and looked out through the windshield of the car. I joined her in looking out through the windows as the car slowly crawled through the parking lot, searching for a spot. We had both slept in the car as it drove through the night, and despite being very early, it was still a busy scene. "You see one?" I asked. "No, let's just let the car handle it," said Talia. I nodded in agreement and unstrapped my seatbelt. The car emitted an irritated chirp as we exited, and then continued looking for a parking spot. "Let's find somewhere good to see it," said Talia. "Somewhere without mosquitoes. They might not find you appetizing, but they will eat me alive here," I said. Talia nodded and following the crowd to the large field. In the distance, standing up against the rising sun, was the rocket. Perched atop it was a capsule and the final load of supplies that were going up to the Martian transfer vehicle, aptly named the Armstrong. "You know I still say we should take your ship for a ride. Watch this launch from orbit," I said. Talia rolled her eyes at me. "The stealth systems on the thing are damaged. I'm fairly certain the USAF would be very curious about an unknown spacecraft re-entering the atmosphere. The status updates say it's still doing fin in orbit of the moon anyway, so no reason to mess with the status quo." I smiled, and seeing an empty patch of grass, I grabbed Talia's hand and dragged her over to it. Separated slightly from the rest of the crowd, I put the blanket down on the ground, and the two of us sat down on it, trying to avoid the early morning dew. For several moments, we just looked out at the rocket. It was oddly reminiscent of the Apollo launch vehicles I had seen in old footage. A single stack painted white, almost in an homage to those earlier forays into space. Much of the structure was even the same. Rocket design hadn't really changed in the past half-century. Point blast down, and you go up. "It's amazing," said Talia, looking out at it. I glanced over at her, and at the metallic bracelet over her arm. 12 score marks already adorned it, matching my own, and in the bright rising sun of Cape Canaveral, the two bands of metal were gleaming quite brightly, displaying many of the smaller scratches. 12 years since that day, and although both of us had aged, she was still as beautiful as that first day I met her. Perhaps even more so. "It is." I wasn't exactly referring to the rocket. "You have a ship that can travel at FTL speeds," Talia nodded. "Yes, but I obtained it through less than honest means. I stole it from aliens. Give humans a few more years, and I believe you'll figure it out on your own." "Hopefully." Leaning back into the blanket, I closed my eyes and basked in the sun. The crowd around us began to thicken, and in the distance I heard drones and the media. Everyone was here, and the anticipation was palpable. This was the next step, the future of humanity carried forth on an explosion of chemical energy. We waited until the sun was nearly at its zenith. "Here we go," said Talia. Both of us stood and looked out at the rocket. The crowd counted down, and the tension in the air rose. The engines ignited 2 seconds before liftoff, and the fantastic bone-shaking roar soon reached us. The rocket tore away from its earthly bonds and slowly climbed into the sky. Looking down at the old laptop, I wondered why it was beeping, or why we still had the device, as it was from 2019 or something. Opening the shell, I looked at the screen and felt my heart drop. The display showed a message in Talia's language. Signal acquired. Rendezvous at following coordinates. After all this time, she had received the signal she had been waiting for. Her people were reaching out to her, calling her home. "What's happening?" Talia inquired from beneath the bedding. She was curled up on my chest, trying to absorb as much of my body heat as possible. "Sasha seems to have decided it's time to get up. I believe she knocked over the tree. She's likely trapped under it." Talia groaned, and slowly the covers below my chin shifted, revealing a small portion of her face. "Sasha!" she called out. I heard a soft thump and the patter of paws. The bed moved slightly as the cat jumped up and quickly made her way to my head. In the morning darkness, the cat blinked down at me expectantly. "You shouldn't be on the bed." The covers moved again, and Talia's arm shot out, grabbing the cat. She pulled the ungrateful creature under the covers with her, and I felt it settle against my chest, next to the creature I actually enjoyed having there. I leaned back into my pillow and smiled. Talia had fallen asleep again. I, unfortunately, couldn't drift in and out of sleep as easily as she could, and in any case, I knew it was unwise to leave the cat unattended so close to me. The reflective eyes of the small creature were looking up at me from beneath the covers. I stared back. As Talia shifted in her sleep, she pulled the jet-black cat closer to her and up onto my chest. Unlike any other cat I knew, Sasha tolerated all of this rough handling, but only from Talia. If I so much as tried to pet her, I would end up with a nice collection of small scratches all over my forearms. "Behave. She needs to rest," I whispered to the small thing. Sasha didn't respond, and seemingly content, closed her eyes and curled up closer to the alien sleeping on my chest. Shaking my head, I leaned back into my pillows and looked out through the blinds of the bedroom. The moonlight was illuminating the steady snowfall outside. It was incredible, but it actually appeared we were going to have a white Christmas. For the past few years, it had typically been too warm to even wear a heavy jacket, let alone see snow. Global warming was a cruel reality. This season had been quite chilly, cold enough that Talia had often snuggled up to me, seeking my body's warmth. Not that I minded. Merry Christmas. The cat had once again toppled the tree, shattering more of the ornaments Talia and I had collected over time. I headed to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and retrieved the leftover bacon and sugared ham from the previous day. Carrying the plate, I returned to the living room and set it on the coffee table. Going over to the Christmas tree, I carefully extracted the small gift out from under it that I had gotten her. "Shall we start with the smaller ones?" I asked, holding out the neatly wrapped package to her. Slurping the cold bit of bacon she was eating into her mouth, Talia nodded. "Sure, yours is over by the plug." I handed her the small package and went to retrieve my own. Reaching under the tree, I also extracted a small packet of catnip, a treat for Sasha to keep her distracted while we unwrapped our gifts. Tossing it past the cat, she darted away from Talia with a yowl of excitement and pounced on the packet. Sitting down next to Talia, I grabbed a corner of the comforter she had dragged off of the bed and snuggled into it with her. "Good?" I asked. "Good," said Talia, who had wasted no time in curling up closer to me. For a moment, the two of us looked at one another. "Well, go on," I said, gesturing at the gift. Talia tore into the small package and stared for a moment in confusion at the 2 slips of paper inside. It was quite a challenge to obtain actual tickets. Everything is digital these days. "Tickets?" asked Talia as she turned the slips of paper over. "I looked over the data on your planet from before the nuclear war. You never saw what your planet might have looked like before the devastation. I thought you might like to witness the next best thing." Talia looked down at the tickets again. "Brazil? That's in South America, right?" "Yep, and the rainforest there matched just about everything in the specs for what most of your planet was like. I've never really considered what my planet was like before I was born. To me, it was always the ruins of the cities. I had read about what things were like, but only the oldest Vicurians remembered what it was like before the ash fell and the winters lengthened to consume the entire year. They didn't like to talk about what we had lost." Talia held the 2 tickets up thoughtfully. "To witness what my planet was once like, before the devastation. That is a prospect I had never even dared to dream of. It was always an impossibility. "So, a fitting gift, then?" I inquired. Talia's ears perked up, and she smiled. "A perfect one. I fear mine won't measure up." I smiled, leaned forward, and placed a kiss on her forehead. "Just promise to shield me from any nasty predators in the rainforest, and that I might witness what that camouflage ability can do in its natural setting." "So you wish to see me unclothed?" said Talia, giggling. "Still a valid request from a biological standpoint," I defended. Talia laughed again, her ears flattening as she rolled her eyes at me. She picked up the wrapped present and thrust it into my hands. "Your turn." I quickly removed the wrapping paper and opened the box. What is it?" I asked, examining the mass of wires and electronics inside. "It's a tricorder, or at least the closest I could manage," Talia explained. "A tricorder? We've been watching far too many reruns on Netflix," I remarked. Leaning over, Talia slapped my shoulder. "Be appreciative. I only had the alien shuttle's schematics to work with. It took me ages to figure out what they even meant." Looking back at the electronics, I frowned. This is alien technology? The invader's technology, and it's an approximation. There's no actual alien tech in there. The alien stuff was only an inch big, Talia clarified, carefully extracting the device and handing it to me. "Except that now I must explain how I devised what is likely one of the most significant advancements in medical scanning in the past 2 decades, Talia said with a shrug. "You often bring work home, so now you won't have to labor as long when you do." Why do I sense you're hinting at something here, and that your motives aren't entirely pure?" I asked. Talia smiled. "You work hard enough as it is. Why not grant you a bit more free time?" "Thank you," I replied, giving her a peck on the cheek. Talia smiled and set the box down on the coffee table, taking it from my hands. I gently stroked her ears as she leaned in, and she melted back into my arms. Sasha, apparently feeling left out, jumped up onto the couch and let out a meow. Talia opened the comforter, and the small cat jumped into it, snuggling up against her and emitting a rumbling purr. I grabbed a few more pieces of ham and held them up to Talia. She giggled, nipping at my fingers slightly as she ate it. For several long minutes, my little family relaxed. "Should we open the rest?" I inquired. "Later," she replied. "Later," I agreed. Picking up the last of the wrapping paper and placing it in the recycling bin, I sat back down on the couch. Sasha was having fun hiding in, prowling between and pouncing on the various gift boxes that were still scattered around, totally ignoring the plethora of toys and treats that she had received. Talia was up and gazing out the window at the snow. The sun was already setting, not that we had seen it at any point during the day with the snowstorm continuing unabated. I casually turned the television on, hoping to find some old Christmas comedy to watch. Several dozen have been confirmed dead in this latest terrorist attack from the growing. I quickly turned the television off and sighed, my mood ruined. Perhaps it was selfish of me, but at the moment I did not wish to dwell on the world's troubles. "Peace on earth, goodwill to all men," quoted Talia, turning around from the window even as the wind rattled the panes. I shrugged. It would seem not everyone shares the same views. Talia returned to the table, toying with the small box holding the tickets. Her ears moved back and forth, uncertain. "Your world is quite peculiar," she said, moving to the couch and closing her eyes. "What makes you say that?" I asked as she leaned on my shoulder, the two of us absently watching Sasha crawl through the boxes. "Your people are more violent than mine, yet you still strive for peace." I smiled and slowly nodded. "We aspire to it, but never quite achieve it. You haven't destroyed yourselves yet." "We haven't because we all have weapons aimed at one another. If a single warhead is used, the entire Earth will go up in flames," I countered. Chuckling, I added, "And we still have madmen killing people for ridiculous ideologies. Not enough is done to stop them, as we're content to let others die, so long as they're far away." Talia fell silent, and I realized I may have touched on a sensitive topic with the mention of nuclear annihilation. She looked away, staring intently at nothing. "For my people's history, we were divided. Each nation was an eternal fixture. We had feuds lasting thousands of years. We were taught our enemies were little more than animals, unworthy of being called Vakurian. Humans aren't like that. Talia paused, taking a breath. Humans are ever-changing. Even in your greatest wars, you still saw your foe as human. We haven't, I interrupted. Talia shook her head, dismissing my statement. I've read the histories. You had brutal individuals and dehumanized different groups at times. But you improved without destroying your world. Leaning forward, Talia picked up another cookie from the plate and offered it to me. I took a bite before she finished it off. We haven't made much progress, Talia sighed. I suppose it might be difficult for you to see, given your human perspective. Your species may kill each other in small numbers, and it is indeed terrible. I think it might even be necessary for humans, so that each generation understands the cost of war. My people, however, showed no mercy towards our enemies, but we only ever fought every few generations. Besides our wars, we never interacted with one another. We had no Romeo and Juliets. To engage with the enemy was tantamount to committing suicide. Talia turned around in my lap and wrapped her arms around me. Humans like to think they are monsters, and some of you are, but my people before the nuclear fallout had no idea what we might bring upon ourselves. We had no measure of the pain it might cause. It took a nuclear winter and an alien invasion for us to realize that we are all the same, that our hair color and cultural differences weren't something that should divide us. Talia leaned forward and playfully bit at my throat. I began to rub her back and she sighed. Even this, 2 generations ago, if we had the ability to travel the stars, we would have been conquerors, not explorers or peacekeepers like humanity dreams of. If you weren't like us, you were something to be eliminated. In a way, perhaps we should be grateful we nearly destroyed ourselves. Surviving the aftermath taught us that we were not so different. Maybe the aliens invading what remained of our world was our penance. Talia, you don't mean that. No one deserves to have their own world taken from them. If humanity were ever attacked like that, we would band together for the first time in history, I can assure you. We might attack and kill one another, but deep down, we are still human, and the earth is ours. Talia buried her face in my chest. That's what I mean. If the aliens had invaded before the war, we still wouldn't have worked together. You state it as if it is a fact. You're so human that you can't even think of not banding together with those you might call an enemy to face an even greater foe. I considered what Talia had told me, and I tried to imagine her as something other than my wife. She had pheromones to influence males from a distance, the ability to blend into her surroundings, and a sense of hearing keener than most predators on Earth. Quick and lethal when she wished to be, an army of her kind invading would have been something to fear. But they were gone now, removed from their world and cast among the stars. She was possibly the last of her species, finding solace in the embrace of an alien. The worst thing is that I'm lonely, said Talia, her voice tinged with sorrow. Lonely? I asked. I miss my parents, my brothers and sisters. I long to be around someone who can hear and smell as I do. I want someone to talk to about being Vicurian. I want all of that, and I feel horrible about it. Talia was crying now, and I could feel the tears seeping into my shirt. For several minutes she didn't move, and even Sasha was keeping a respectful distance, calmly watching us from a box of gifts. I have you. I'm not supposed to be lonely. I don't want to be like what my people were, to hate someone because they're different. Reaching down, I slowly tilted Talia's face up and looked her in the eyes. Talia, you might be the last of your species. Feeling lonely, missing your own people and your culture, does not mean you hate me. You've had to adapt to so much in your life. The crumbling ruins of your civilization, fighting alien invaders, and landing on a foreign world. A sense of being out of place would, I think, be understandable. Talia nodded, calming slightly. I suppose so. Humans strive to treat everyone the same, and we're still working on that, yet we can still recognize the differences, and we should. Reaching up, I tickled Talia's ears, and she giggled. You and I are a bit more different than most, but that's what makes it special. Talia sighed and leaned into my hand as I continued to scratch her ear. Do you think I'll ever see another Vicurian again? Asked Talia. I considered it for a moment. I hope so. The universe is vast and your people have endured much. Vicurians seem quite resilient. Talia's ears twitched. We are fairly stubborn if our history is anything to go by. I chuckled. Well, I don't believe I've ever won an argument with you. Talia laughed and snuggled in closer to me. For several minutes, we simply looked at one another. I love you, she whispered, pulling my head down to plant a quick kiss. I love you too. I turned my gaze back to the screen, slowly shaking my head. If it were Earth, if it were humans calling out through the void after being nearly annihilated, I would never forgive someone who kept that from me. With a sigh, I carried the laptop back to our bedroom. Talia lifted her eyes from the book as I stepped into the room. What's that? She asked. I slowly turned the screen around to face her. For a moment, Talia stared at it, confused, until I saw comprehension dawn on her. Is that? Her voice rose to a high-pitched screech, and for a moment her mouth moved without any sound emerging. I gently set the old laptop down. Talia scrambled forward, grabbing it and staring at the screen, the plastic around the display cracking slightly as she gripped it. Careful! This isn't a flex screen, I said. Talia loosened her grip. She looked up at me. Kieran, they're alive! Jumping up from the bed, she tackled me to the floor. They're alive! Talia, look at the transmission, I said. She hesitated and turned back to the old laptop. What? Oh. She trailed off, looking at the information display over the message. It had not been transmitted via the aliens' FTL communication network. The signal had been sent out via classical radio waves. It was a feat of technology that the antenna Talia had set up had been able to pick it up. The coordinates are only 10 light years away, though, so they survived the evacuation, said Talia. I nodded in agreement. They did. I just don't want you to get your hopes up. A lot can happen in 10 years. Talia slowly nodded, her ears flattening, and she turned away from me. Talia, what's wrong? I asked. She didn't say anything for a moment and took a shuddering breath. We have a life here, Kieran. We're both happy here. Do we want to leave that behind? Talia, if we don't go, you're going to regret it for the rest of your life, and I'm going to regret it, I said. But we have a life here. Do you really want to leave that? Talia asked. Reaching out, I grabbed her armband, pulling her to me. Talia, I'm content as long as I'm with you, regardless of where we are. Talia sniffed. So you're willing to leave Earth? She asked. I shrugged. As I said, I'm happy as long as I'm by your side. And the prospect of traveling through space at FTL speeds, I can't say I dislike the idea. Talia chuckled. Are you certain? We may never return to Earth. Talia, you've adapted to my world. Now it's my turn to learn how to live in yours. Besides, I believe your people will need us more than Earth does. December 20th, 2035. Food? Check. Computers? Check. Toiletries? Kieran, we have everything. We can stop going over the list, Talia said, exasperated. I looked over the sizable stack of supplies before us. Fine, but if we forget something, it's your fault. She rolled her eyes. We haven't forgotten anything. I nodded in agreement. The supplies represented our life savings, cashed-out retirements, and maximum credit. A significant investment. I felt a twinge of regret about leaving the house vacant, but selling or doing anything else would have raised suspicions. We had survival rations, enough meat to feed an entire cow, fruits, snacks, toiletries, new and old clothes, a wealth of media, and several computers loaded with useful information. Anything we thought might benefit Talia's people. Atop the pile sat the small oak box holding Sasha, our cat who had succumbed to cancer a few years prior. Talia had grieved that feisty feline for a long time, and even I missed the little creature on occasion, though I'd never admit it. Walking over to Talia, I glanced out at the clear, bitterly cold sky. The shuttle has entered the atmosphere, she said, looking down at her tablet, where she was controlling the craft. Over the ocean, correct? I inquired. She nodded. It's replicating a natural re-entry as well as it can. Once it's flying, the stealth systems will activate. It's about 10 minutes away. I nodded and, turning back around, looked at our home. Talia followed my gaze, and slowly the two of us began to walk through it. We had already packed everything we wanted to take with us, but still the house had been ours for nearly 2 decades. Looking at the wall of the bedroom, I saw the indent in the plaster where I had tripped and slammed my head into the wall because of the cat. I saw the stained patch of carpet where Talia had spat out a glass of red wine from laughing too hard. Looking all around, I could see small scars like the ones on our mating bracelets. "I'll miss this place," Talia remarked, her gaze sweeping the bedroom. I nodded in agreement. Me too. I felt a slight rumble, like a small earthquake, or a strong wind shaking the house. "That's the ship, we should hurry," said Talia. "Right." With a deep breath, I turned away from the bedroom and quickly made my way to the back door of the house. Against the darkness of the night and the cloaking aspects of the ship, I didn't really see it as much as sense that it had landed in our backyard until the back cargo door slid open like a ramp. Slowly, my curiosity getting the better of my sense of urgency, I stepped onto the ramp and walked up into the ship. I had looked at schematics of it and pictures that Talia had of the interior, but it was different to actually be inside of the thing. Stepping into the forward cockpit, I sat down at the co-pilot station and looked out over the controls. I had studied the documents in Talia's tablet for years. I knew what every little thing did. I let my eyes wander over the control panel. I was sitting in an honest-to-God spaceship. "Have you finished your reverie?" Talia asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I get to fly around in a spaceship. I'm going to be freaking out over this for a while. Let me." "Ow!" I exclaimed. "Later. We need to pack everything aboard and get away before the USAF shows up." Grumbling, I grabbed the first crate and began hauling it onto the ship. Talia could be so demanding at times. "Ready?" asked Talia. "Yes," I replied. Talia smirked and slowly pulled back on the controls, causing the shuttle to lurch forward, its nose dipping towards the ground. I heard several crates of supplies slide forward. Talia uttered some rather unpleasant words in her native language that had no direct English equivalent. "Don't say a word," she hissed. I raised my hands. "I'm not saying anything." Talia carefully corrected the shuttle's course, and it rose up into the air. "There we go. Had to remember how to do that," she said. "You sure you can fly this?" I asked, only half joking. Talia turned to glare at me and then punched the controls. The shuttle let out a roar that likely woke half the city below, and we rocketed upwards into the sky, the small, ungainly transport simply forcing its way through the atmosphere. "Yes, I can fly it," Talia said coolly. "Yes, you can," I agreed. Talia, suitably smug, continued our ascent through the Earth's atmosphere. Looking out the side window, I watched as the horizon quickly receded and the blackness of space took hold. Beneath us, the lights of the cities mingled with the stars, and still we climbed higher. "We're as high as the NISS," Talia remarked. "Already," I responded. She nodded, and despite knowing I wouldn't see the new International Space Station, I still scanned the horizon for its familiar form. "Too bad we can't turn the gravity off," I said. "Yeah, I'd have liked to do that. It's passive, though. Probably for the best. It's going to take a few days to reach the rendezvous coordinates. I'm fairly certain it would get old quick." "Probably," I agreed. We continued to rise through the remaining atmosphere, and Talia carefully rotated the shuttle around, giving me a perfect view of the Earth just as the sun began to rise and illuminate the east coast of North America. For a few moments, I simply gazed out at my home as it gradually diminished below us. Though I had seen pictures and movies, and even experienced it through virtual reality, nothing had truly captured the full splendor of the Earth, suspended in the darkness of space, a small sanctuary amidst the desolate void. "Kieran?" Talia's voice broke my reverie, and I looked over to see her watching me. "You're crying." Bringing my hand up, I wiped at my eyes. "Yes, I am. Seeing the Earth like this, it's affecting my perspective a bit." Talia nodded. "We can remain here for a time, if you'd like." I looked back down at the Earth and sniffed. "No, the Earth is now in my past. Let's go meet your people." "Are you sure?" Talia asked. "Yes," I replied. Talia studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Now I find myself in unfamiliar waters. It should be interesting." Talia slowly turned over in her seat and looked at me. "Hopefully, not too eventful." I chuckled. "Hopefully." She was leaning down to press her lips to mine when an alarm went off. Talia immediately jumped out of my lap and back into the pilot chair. "Kieran!" I sat up and looked around. "What?" "The aliens, a ship labeled as the Singer, just dropped out of FTL at this beacon." She swung the shuttle around, and I got my first glimpse of the aliens who had attacked her world. "Not good." "I know that," said Talia. The ship before us loomed, elegant in design with sweeping curves and no harsh angles. It only made the thing more imposing, like a deep-sea predator moving in on its prey. "They're transmitting demands for our surrender. They know the shuttle is stolen," said Talia. "Damn it!" The massive ship's engines flared, and it began to move towards us, ominous against the backdrop of the stars. "They've given us 10 seconds to surrender," said Talia. "They can't have the ship, Talia. We've got the coordinates to Earth and your own people in the computer." Talia slowly nodded. "Yeah, and if they get them," she trailed off. "Fuck," she nodded. "Yeah." I glanced back at the alien ship as a thin beam of energy shot out from it towards us, a warning shot that barely missed us. I looked back at the countdown timer and then to Talia. "Can we go to FTL?" Talia hesitated. "The engines have a high probability of burning out. We didn't give them enough time to cool down. It's a better option than hanging out around here." Talia looked out at the ship. "It is." I looked out at the ship. It represented what Talia's people had fought against and lost too. It represented what humanity might face in the future, what we would have to overcome if we were going to have that final dream of spreading to the stars. "Let's do it." Talia nodded in agreement. "Let's make sure they have something to remember us by, though." Taking the controls, she pushed the joystick forward, and the small shuttle accelerated quickly enough that I was thrown back into my seat, several G's taking hold of me. Our commandeered shuttle rocketed towards the larger ship, the main guns turning to face us. "Now!" said Talia. I hit the panel, and a beam of energy shot out from our small shuttle, hitting the small protrusion on the top of the ship, the bridge. The shields held, but that hardly mattered. We had gotten our point across. I was violently thrown to the side and an alarm blared. "We've been hit!" shouted Talia. Looking back, I could see the small tear in the cargo section of the ship, just a pinprick of light from the stars outside. Reaching back, I punched the door control, sealing the aft cargo section. The breach sealed, I turned back just in time to see the capacitors reach maximum charge. "We're making the jump," said Talia. With a crunching hum, the shuttle once again slipped onto a stream of tachyons, and we accelerated forward, completely bypassing light speed. The stars outside the viewport shifted into their red and blue patterns. The small shuttle let out another whine as we continued to fly. "I'm pushing it to the max. We might make it," said Talia. The floor began to vibrate, and I groaned. "Talia!" "We'll be all right," she said, even as her teeth chattered. I had no frame of reference, but I could tell we were moving faster than the earlier languid pace we had taken between beacons. The shuttle was on her last legs, but she would not die without a fight. "We'll be all right," repeated Talia. I stared out at the stars as the blues and reds began to bleed together, and I closed my eyes. We would make it. We had to. Talia was currently in my lap, having crawled onto me several hours prior. Neither of us had spoken for some time. "Talia, you have absolutely nothing to apologize for," I reassured her. "We walked straight into a trap," she exclaimed. "That was not your doing," I replied, glancing back at the sealed-off rear section of the shuttle. A small hole in the hull was the only sign of the damage we had sustained, the back panel distorted from the FTL engine's malfunction. "Every human on Earth should be grateful to you." Talia frowned. "We couldn't let them find Earth. Humans are quite extraordinary in their development, though they still need time to fully mature. Hopefully, it's not something we'll live to see," I said. Talia shook her head. "No, but I can imagine how it will go for the aliens. Humans are quite extraordinary." I pulled her closer, and she let out a small giggle. "We like it that way." The two of us fell silent, gazing out at the stars through the front view screen. They were beautiful, the entire universe laid out before us. Even knowing the vacuum outside would slowly bleed us dry, I couldn't help but feel content. "We'll make it to the rendezvous point, though it may take longer than expected." I glanced at the display, momentarily confronting the gravity of our predicament. Pushing the thought aside, I drew her closer. 3 centuries is quite the delay," I said. "Well, better late than never." We looked at each other and burst into laughter, the tears on our cheeks eventually turning to mirth. Talia checked the life support, informing me we had just over 2 days left. "We should do something," she said. Leaning forward, she activated the camera. "Apologies for the tardiness. 3 centuries is quite a holdup, but I ran into a spot of trouble. It's an aging Imperial shuttle, dating back to the evacuation, said Ranlin as she gazed at the slowly tumbling craft on the main display. The hull was scarred and pockmarked, the engine pods bearing the clear signs of a past FTL failure. It also appeared to have been struck by an energy blast, with half the dorsal plates melted and the armor barely holding the shuttle together. "Any response from the vessel?" asked Mont, his ears and those of the bridge crew raised in attention, several blending into their consoles. Ranlin checked her console. Not even the docking beacon. The only active system is the transmitter, and it's likely running on its last reserves. "Then let's bring it in to dock," Mont decided. "We're going to board it?" Ranlin questioned. Mont nodded. "That ship is transmitting one of our oldest codes, and from what we can tell, it was part of the initial evacuation. Whoever may be aboard deserves to be remembered." Ranlin agreed, and the bridge crew watched as small drones quickly deployed and attached to the ancient vessel, guiding the comparatively smaller craft to dock with the Ascension. "You're coming?" Mont asked, beginning to leave the bridge. "Sir," Ranlin responded. "You found it, so I think you should see what's inside," he said. Ranlin smiled and hurried after the captain. Walking the time-worn corridors of the ship, stolen by her people's ancestors and improved over generations, Ranlin knew this was one of only 3 capital vessels they had escaped the Empire with. For nearly 3 centuries, the Vakurian survivors had eked out an existence on the fringes of Imperial territory, scavenging what they could. With a population now just over 50,000, they were slowly recovering, though it would take many generations before they could challenge the Empire. But the dream lived on in all of them. Approaching one of the small airlocks on the side of the ship, Ranlin quickly donned her spacesuit and followed the captain into the chamber, along with the group of analysts and Marines. "Any response from the computers on the thing?" asked Mont. "We're getting telemetry, but even that's scrambled. Understandable if it's been without shielding for a few hundred years. The cosmic radiations probably messed with all of the stuff on the ship," said one of the analysts. The airlock depressurized, and the outer hatch of the ancient shuttle was exposed. The doors were supposed to automatically open, but they seemed to be sealed shut. Mont and several others quickly grasped the handholds on the sides of the airlock doors and tugged at them. The metal doors slowly slid back, revealing the cargo section of the small ship that had been in a vacuum for nearly 300 years. Mont pointed a light into the cabin, and it immediately became apparent that the only occupants were in the front of it. The rear compartment was full of odd-looking artifacts and technology, things she had never seen before, and were most definitely not Imperial technology. As Ranlin stepped into the aged vessel, her gaze was drawn to the forward section of the ship. "What is all of this stuff?" asked an analyst as he looked at the things stacked up around the back of the ship. Ranlin didn't answer. She was being drawn inexorably forwards. Stepping up to the cockpit of the small shuttle, she gasped, for a man and woman were lying together in the small bunk, inlaid on the wall of the ship. "Captain!" she said. Mont hurried over and shined his light at the two. The man's hands were around the woman, holding her close to him. Even in death, the woman was gripping him in a similar eternal embrace. "They were mated," said Mont. He shined his light at their arms, where the promissory bracelets on each of them was apparent. Ranlin looked at the 2 strips of metal. They were well worn and imbued with many scratches. The couple had been together for a long time, whoever they were. Ranlin scrutinized the man more closely, her light trained on him. "Captain, what could cause gray hair?" she asked. Mont frowned. "I know of nothing that would." "Why?" Ranlin leaned in. "Look at him. He has some gray and—" She paused, examining further. "Where are his ears?" Mont leaned forward. "What's on the side of his head?" Carefully, so as not to disturb the deceased, Mont moved a bit of the man's hair aside. Revealed were very alien ears, like those of many Class B species in the Empire. The 2 Vakurians were stunned. The woman, whoever she was, lay in an eternal embrace with an alien. Lights flashed on inside the ship. "Power's on!" called a technician. The main cockpit screen lit up, displaying an image of the 2 in the alcove, alive. It was the first item in the computer's memory, cued for immediate playback. Ranlin and Mont straightened to look at it. Glancing at the captain, Ranlin touched the control panel, starting the video. She had formed a deep bond with a human, and they had shared their lives together. She had received the signal too late, once it had filtered through normal space limited by light speed. Still, they had left Earth, left the comfort of their lives to seek them out and be reunited. Her human mate, her husband, had not hesitated for a moment to follow her to the stars. The two had encountered a setback, their FTL engines sustaining damage, leading them to drift for the next 300 years in each other's company. Mont approached the conference table and picked up the human computer device. "You get anything off of these?" he asked. "Some. It's not much. The data storage method was antiquated to say the least. The fact that it got 300 years of cosmic rays hasn't helped." Mont nodded. "No? I suppose it wouldn't. There's a bigger issue at the moment than retrieving the data." Ranlin looked up. "What?" "There are some factions in the council that want to commit the woman to the stars as is proper, and keep the human as a sample for study." Ranlin's ears went flat to her head in anger for a moment. "No!" Moving to the side, she motioned at the table in front of her, pulling up the hundreds of images that she had already retrieved from the computer devices on the shuttle. Two-dimensional images were projected up from the table, showing the two and the life they had together. Images inside of an alien domicile where light streamed in, both of them hugging some small furry creature. Another showing the two of them sitting on an outcropping of rock. Behind them, an alien sunset. Ranlin cycled through another dozen pictures showing the two as they aged. They were together for almost their entire lives. The human left the sanctuary of his homeworld to follow her to the stars. We can't separate them. Mont felt his own ear twitch downwards, and he glared at the analyst. "This is an opportunity to gain intelligence on another Class C species, one that developed further than we managed to. If the records you translated are correct, they managed to create a small colony on another planet in their solar system without Imperial technology, almost 300 years ago. Think about where they could be today." Ranlin nodded. "Their technology could give us an advantage over the Empire, but I doubt saying we separated a mated pair at the moment of death would be the best way to introduce ourselves. From what I understand of their culture, they would be as upset as any of us." "Cultures do change over time," said Mont. Ranlin glared at the captain. "I doubt mating would be so different." Mont paused and shook his head. "No, I don't think so either. Predictably, the council has agreed to support my decision. To them, this is merely a curiosity, nothing more." Ranlin shook her head. "If the humans have kept pace with technological development, as these records suggest, they could be our greatest allies against the Empire. This is momentous." Mont considered the young officer for a moment. "What would you propose?" Ranlin hesitated. "I say we leave them to continue drifting. We take the message they died to give us and seek out humanity." Mont looked down at the images on the table, sighing. "I agree. The shuttle's only value is in its raw materials. The computer systems are too outdated, the tachyon drive is fused, and the frame is too damaged to repair. We must give them proper respects. We may not know much about humanity, but we know this human comforted someone who thought she might be the last of her kind. They were mates." Mont nodded. "I've already received requests from the crew for a proper burial." Ranlin looked inside the shuttle's cabin, where the couple had been carefully moved and laid on a bed of colorful carpets and embroidered blankets. She even spotted a piece of cloth from the initial evacuation tucked around Talia, who had more right to it than anyone else, being born on the homeworld. Since the Vicurian people had taken to wandering the stars to survive, they had buried their dead among the stars, a cremation that would one day scatter the individual's remains across the universe as the star they rested in exploded. This burial was akin to the practices of their homeworld, sending off the departed with all they might need for the journey. The response to the pair's final embrace, as captured in a single image, had struck a chord with the ship's population. Stepping back from the shuttle, Ranlin looked to the honor guard. Mont nodded, and the men closed the doors. The captain of the Valiant then releasing the airlock. With a resounding thud, the shuttle detached and drifted away, delivering the message of an ally among the stars. I was so cold. the thin air making it hard to breathe. She lay atop me, our bodies entwined in the small bunk, her warmth stolen by the chill. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my breath clouding. Carefully, I held her tighter, trying to keep her warm. But Talia slipped away, the spark within her gone. Letting out a cry of anguish, I pulled her close, unwilling to let her go. Living without her was too painful. Gazing upon her face, I saw the warrior, the refugee, the survivor, the woman I loved. With that image etched in my mind, I closed my eyes and followed her into the void.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.